Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of Candid Caller. I'm Lily Mackey and I'm joined by my little sister and co-host, Rosa Mackey.
You don't have to make it obvious that I'm your little sister every time.
And this week's episode is a really poignant and I think a story that a lot of people will resonate with and a topic that a lot of people will resonate with. We're going to be talking about workplace harassment and workplace kind of toxic
environments.
Toxic workplace culture and sort of harassment, assault, and then going into really extreme topics like stalking by co-workers and all of that sort of stuff. So a really interesting and a topic that doesn't get spoken about enough. I think a lot of people, and we'll learn more from our caller today, but I think a lot of people tend to
experience this.
Yeah, and I think also put up with some of this sort of stuff. We were talking about this earlier, how I think women have been conditioned to not, kick up a fuss and not want to be rude and not want to be... I was listening to a case of a woman who was stalked by a co-worker for 5 or 6 years, I think it was. Oh and she said that she didn't want to make a fuss and she didn't want to tell anyone about it because she didn't want her job to be put in jeopardy and she loved her job. And it's interesting that I think a lot of women do feel as though they can't say something because they want to, remain in their job and keep that sort of, I
guess sometimes it's your word against theirs as well, which is just a scary place to be because...
Well, yeah, but we're going to talk about ways as well to, log stuff and protect yourself if you're in a situation where you feel as though you're unsafe. Interesting. I was saying, so I was watching this interview with this woman who'd been stalked in her job. And it made me think of this story that I learned about, this case that I learned about many years ago about a serial killer. And you would never believe how he would find his victims. So basically he would go into supermarkets and that's where he would find his victims. And the way he would figure out whether or not someone was a quote unquote good target was that he would bump into a woman purposefully. And the way
I've heard this.
And the way that that the woman would respond would give him a gauge as to whether or not he should target her or not. Okay. So he would purposefully bump into women and then basically if they would turn around and sort of apologize and sort of say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, then he would see them more as a target than a woman who would sort of turn around and give him a face or whatever. Yeah. But don't you think it's an automatic response for a woman to be like, oh, sorry? Women say sorry so much more than men.
But not me.
Typically, yeah. But typically women say sorry so much more than men do. Yeah. So I think that's more of an automatic response.
Yeah, I would always automatically say sorry if I felt it was my fault somehow. But no, if someone's gone and bumped into me, I would literally look at them and be like...
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy. So anyway, coming back to this week's theme and this week's topic of workplace harassment and being intimidated by colleagues and all of that sort of stuff. Should we talk about P. Diddy? So a video, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but a video resurfaced recently of a incident that happened in 2016.
Running to the left.
Yeah. A video resurfaced of him and his then partner, Cassie, who
bless her heart,
in 2016 of a case of domestic abuse and violence towards her. That's horrifying. And it honestly made me feel sick.
I saw a few of their interviews on the red carpet where they're just being normal. But if you actually, obviously now you know what's happened when the video surfaced. If you actually look at their body language, you can see that she's abused. But
it's sad.
Unless you knew, you wouldn't be able to tell at the time, obviously. But obviously now everyone knows what was going on. Yeah. You can really tell that she was not in a good place.
In domestic violence cases, statistically it takes a woman or a man, because obviously men can also be the victims of domestic violence, but obviously we know that women are more likely to be the victim, and it takes a victim 7 times to leave an abusive partner, statistically on average. So it's a really scary and really sad situation, and it's not talked about enough. And although the video is horrifying and awful, it has been really good in starting this conversation again and having a open discourse about, what was going on. And so now that the video's come out, a lot of his employees are now starting to speak up about the toxic work environment that was going on at the time under him. And something I read about the other day was that there was a thing that was known in the company that they named it "You're getting past a brick." Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Have you heard about it?
Yeah.
And essentially it would relate to, he was known to be violent and to be aggressive and to be a very sort of tumultuous character. And
what does tumultuous mean?
Like just up and down, like not a stable man, basically, and you know, unpredictable in a sense. And colleagues would say to them, "Oh, you're being past the brick." And then if you were past the brick, you would be his target. And there's like someone who's come out saying that he was like, that Diddy like put his hands around his neck and was screaming in his face. And then it's also come out subsequently that his sort of secretary or PA or whoever was in charge of bringing, you know, employees in would warn prospective employees and say, you know, that he had a particular style of management and that some people would feel uncomfortable. And, you know, so it's sparked a big conversation about it. And obviously he is, you know, being charged with horrendous crimes that go far beyond kind of being a tumultuous employer. But in the context of this week's episode, it's interesting to consider the fact that when men who are well-known and wealthy and have a lot of power and influence in a particular industry behave badly, that they tend to get away with it for a lot longer and people are more worried to speak out. Yeah.
So sad.
Yeah. Another topic that came up recently that's been in the news a huge amount is this McDonald's scandal. Yeah.
So weird.
Crazy.
And there was actually more scandals about not only assault, but actually racism and what else was it? Racism, assault.
Yeah. A lot of very young employees.
Young people,
of McDonald's.
being like groomed for vapes.
Yeah. Well, there was a story where
she was told to have sex with this man so that he could buy her some vapes.
Yeah, 17-year-olds. Really, really horrendous situation. Come out in the news. People are speaking about it. People have left McDonald's subsequently and are now speaking out openly about their experiences. But again, it all comes back to big corporations, lots of money, big influence, whether you are a corporation, whether you're a rapper, a star, whoever it is, it doesn't matter. A scary thought as well, I think, with all these sorts of like topics that relate to workplace and toxic work environment and all of that sort of stuff is that sadly things can escalate, you know, quite quickly. And like you've had, you know, a lot of cases that I've told you about in the last few days of, you know, it's starting with harassment and, you know, slurs and, you know, making sort of remarks that are completely inappropriate. And then actually it completely escalating. And like I touched on, you know, that woman who'd been stalked in her workplace and then inevitably, well, not inevitably, but then she ended up being stalked by her co-worker. And in a lot of cases of stalking, violence isn't something that's, you know, a prerequisite to it. It's not necessarily an obvious trait. Like there's lots of different types of stalking. You know, there's obviously stalking online. You can be physically stalked. You know, you can then, there's lots of different ways you can do it.
Stalking to me is aggressive regardless.
Yes.
Right.
But in the UK, in order for someone to be convicted of, well, first of all, it's very hard to convict someone of stalking. Very, very hard.
Why?
It's one of the lowest, it has the lowest conviction rate. A lot of times in the UK, when you are being harassed by someone, it's really hard to prove. And so a lot of times you're encouraged to keep a log or some sort of like documentation that relates to your case or relates to the incident that's occurring
As
to
in,
you.
like in your notes, you would write down
notes
what's
or
happening.
pictures or just anything really. Like a lot of times people who are being stalked on social media, you'll like block an account and then they'll create another account and they'll continue stalking you. So keeping a log of all those accounts in order to prove that this was a persistent thing that obviously sort of invaded your life and made you feel a certain type of way and makes you obviously feel really unsafe. But it's really hard to get a conviction in the UK because the way that that law enforcement look at it and that the police look at it is unless that person has physically touched you, it's very hard to prove. And harassment and stalking and all these things are subjective to an extent. And so, yeah, it's a really difficult topic to kind of uncover and to speak about. And like we saw with Baby Ranger, it is something that goes wild when there's a case. And it's even more crazy when you think of a woman stalking a man versus a man stalking a woman, because typically you would think, if you think of a stalker, you would think of it being gendered in that way, that it would be a man towards a woman. So on that note, it's amazing that we've got someone on the phone today who is open and willing to share her experience of workplace harassment, toxic work culture, that culminated into this pivotal day where she was, followed. You're going to have to listen to the story. But yes, when we read the story, we were both like, oh my gosh, it's just horrifying and so sad, and it's not something that she's shared with many people, and so we definitely wanted to get on the phone with her and speak to her and see, you know, what her perspective is like and what effect it has had on her life. I know that a lot of people who have been stalked, a lot of victims of stalking, find it really hard to reintegrate into normal life again because they've lived in such a way for so long that it's hard to then go back to what life was before. So it'd be really interesting to hear her perspective on that. So we're so excited to have this week's caller on. Thank you so much for coming on and having the bravery to share your story. I know that it must be really difficult, so we really appreciate you sharing this with us and giving us the time to tell your story. So I guess we should sort of start a little bit with the background of how all of this came about. So would you like to share a little bit how you got into your role and whether you enjoyed your role, and just a little bit of background about your job and what you were sort of doing?
Sure. So I started off working as a waitress and behind the bar at it was a hotel actually.
And were you like a relatively big team, or were you quite a small team working?
Yeah, it was a huge team. We had 2 managers and about 30 staff.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. And what was your role there?
My role was just opening, closing, behind bar and waitress.
Okay. And then would you like to share with us a little bit? So we know that you had sort of the sort of story relates to being in a sort of toxic work environment, and one particular man really made you feel uncomfortable, and sort of he was sort of the culprit of this story. Do you want to explain a little bit what that first interaction with him was like, and then how possibly that developed?
Yeah, for sure. So this guy was a seasonal pizza chef. So in the summer, he'd come and we'd have this huge bar outside with this huge pizza kitchen outside joined to the bar.
Okay.
And he came in he was there for 2-3 weeks as we all got to know each other. And it was a known thing that he had a crush on me, and everyone would encourage him and, you know, make jokes, and just, it was all a big joke at the start.
Okay. And did that make you feel uncomfortable in any type of way, or not so much at the beginning?
Not so much at the beginning, but I feel like that's what kind of egged it on.
Right. Okay. And then how did things escalate from that moment?
So he started off by, it was just catcalling and just giving me free pizza and just giving me names, and it was all a huge joke at the very start. So after 2 weeks had passed, he'd start becoming more weird.
Okay.
He'd start grabbing his crotch when he saw me and becoming more vulgar towards me.
Okay. And this was very targeted towards you. That there wasn't other people he was doing this to. Did you feel as though this was a really targeted thing?
Yeah, it was very targeted, very.
Okay. And did you ever share your like concerns as it started to escalate with any other co-workers, or did you ever feel comfortable enough to do that, or not so much?
Well, because this was seasonal, in the summertime, I
Yeah.
was mainly behind the bar, and it was just me and it was guys. I wasn't working with girls behind the
Okay.
bar, it was all guys. So if I was to speak to them, they just laughed it off. They basically just laughed it off and told me, it's a big joke, nothing's going to come of it.
Like he
And I
just
was,
fancies you, take it as a compliment sort of thing.
yeah, yeah.
It's so wrong as well,
So
because it
wrong.
makes you feel so invalidated in your
Yeah.
feelings.
I wasn't expecting it to go as far as it had gone, realistically. Like, I never would have thought this would be the guy that would follow me home and traumatize me, for sure. No.
Okay. So tell us about the day that all of this kind of came to a pivotal head, where you really felt really unsafe, and where everything kind of came to a head. Can you walk us through that day?
Yeah, so it was actually my day off and his day off. And we were living in this small town. It's where we were located. It's on a remote island on the outskirts of the UK.
Okay.
Still connected to the UK, but it was just one of those islands on the outskirts of the UK. So it was kind of very small. Everyone knew everyone. And what happened was, it was my day off. I was walking to the corner shop to grab some things. And as I was walking there, I could see him outside this corner shop. I go in, I go into this shop. He's screaming things at me at the shop, right? And I'm hiding at the end of the shop, and the shopkeeper is like trying to protect me because she could see what's going on, bless her. It was this sweet old lady.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I went to go pay for my things because I thought he'd had gone at that point. He's actually waiting for me outside the shop. He could see I'm about to pay. He goes behind me and he's waiting for me to pay, right? So he's behind me. I pay for my things. I go to leave the shop. I just know deep within my soul he's going to come out and follow me. I saw this coming from a mile away.
Yeah.
So I leave the shop and I start fast walking out.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden I could just hear him screaming things at me, like, come back, we have to go out, like, just come with me. And I'm sprinting at this point. I find like a little family of 3 and I'm like, hey, can you just stay with me while this guy goes? As he saw I was with other people, he then backed off and walked away. So it took for him to see me, to have other people around me, to then leave me alone. If I was by myself, this guy would have followed me home, saw where I had lived, and God knows what would have happened from there onwards.
Yeah. And I guess it's such a scary thing when you're in that situation where the only thing you want to do is go home because it's your safe place, but you can't because then he'll know where you live. And then that just is like so terrifying. So it's like you're put in this horrendous situation. Thank God those people were close by to be able to help.
Yeah, thank God. So anyways, the next day I go into work to go and report this to HR or a manager. He goes in before me. So before I could even say anything, management says to me that I have made this pizza chef very uncomfortable to work with. And I was like, what are you talking about? They said, yes. They said that I had called him a pervert and that it's made him uncomfortable that I had called this man a pervert.
Oh my God.
Literally. So then I went to explain to them what had happened prior, but they just didn't want to know. They didn't want to hear me out. They didn't want to have my back. They just said, look, I am more replaceable than the seasonal pizza chef they had. So they were like, listen, boys will be boys. They literally said, boys will be boys. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. It was just so frustrating.
That is wild.
What the hell?
Obviously so upset.
Horrified. What happened next? So they fire you essentially for being the victim of someone having harassed and then, culminating into him following you home and making you feel so unsafe. What happened next?
So as I was listening to these women just not care, I was so angry. Like, I just started crying. I just, like, I couldn't breathe. I was just crying so much. Like, I didn't feel heard. I just felt like I've been violated. Like, I just felt like everyone was against me. I just couldn't believe what was going on. After all of that happened, I went home. I called my dad. I was crying. And my dad was like, look, if it's as serious as it is, call the police, make a report. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I will file a police report. So that's exactly what I did. I filed a police report. I wrote down absolutely everything. All details were written down, everything.
Yeah.
Did I hear back from the police? Absolutely not. That was the last I heard. Like, nothing.
And did you do this online?
Yeah, online.
What? I'm so sorry.
No email, no phone call, nothing.
My gosh. This is what we were talking about this earlier of how in stalking cases, a lot of time, stalking and harassment, and especially in the workplace, a lot of times it's just completely overlooked. Like, oh, okay, yeah, moving on. Like, it's not something we want to consider today, which is just so horrifying and invalidates your experience so much. And emotionally, how has this affected you, and how has it affected your work environment now? Is it something that you've held on to, or how do you feel about it now?
Yeah, it's just, to be honest, it's made me completely cold. Like, I don't want to be too friendly with anyone ever again after this.
It's so sad that it happens in so many workplaces and it's not spoken about enough. So we're really grateful that you've shared this now. If you could speak to this guy or say something to this guy now, do you have anything that you would want to say to him?
To be honest, I don't think I'd ever want to look at this man ever again in my whole. I don't want to give him the time of day. I don't even want to gift him with my presence.
Yes, so fair.
Yes,
and do you have anything? Do you have any feelings towards the police or law enforcement, government agencies? Obviously, you've been let down. Do you have any feelings towards them?
Yeah, because that was the first time I've ever contacted the police in my whole entire life. And if that was the response I've got, then I'm never going to them for help again. Yeah. Ever.
Yeah. So bad. It really, it stops those sorts of situations when they're not handled properly. It really breaks trust. And then it's really hard to bring that trust back because, those situations really need to be dealt with in the moment.
I guess everyone handled it wrong. From the managers to the police, everything was just handled wrong. So.
Yeah.
I just felt like nobody had my back.
Thank you so much for coming on the call. We're so fortunate and we're so, we're really so grateful that you shared that, and hopefully that will resonate with other people and it will start some sort of conversation about these horrendous, toxic work environments that really need to be addressed, and people need to I think HR
work environments that are facilitated by managers, actually
by managers and by co-workers as well, and the whole system is just needs to really be reevaluated. So thank you so much for sharing, and we're really humbled and grateful that you were here with us.
That was the wildest phone call. I feel like the craziest thing for me is the fact that the two women that actually facilitated this in the end, the two people that actually facilitated this in the end were both women who were older and most likely have kids or grandkids. And they absolutely didn't do anything about it. And on top of it, the fact that he came with the complaint first, saying that she had called him a perv, like I said on the call, he essentially snitched on himself, because why is she calling you a perv? And the fact that no one actually delved deeper into that and asked her, okay, why did you call him a perv? The fact that it was handled in the way it was handled because he was easily replaced and she was easily replaced and he wasn't, is just absolutely wild. Like, I can't believe it.
I think it happens so often as well, where you would think oh, women are going to have my back and women understand. And like, you think you feel safe around women. And actually, you know, we've had 2 or 3 calls now of people sharing their experiences, and sometimes women are present in situations, and what do? Nothing. And in some way, and that in this case, they allowed the behavior to continue. How can you do that? I guess for a lot of employers, though, it's like they think it's not in their interest or in the business's interest.
But it's like, that's so wrong, because I don't understand how you can't think this is in our best interest to get rid of someone that acts like this.
Oh, sure.
If he's doing it to staff members, then who's to say that he's not looking at clients and people that are actually coming in to pay for their service, and he's not doing that to them as well? You know, it's very delusional to think that he's only going to be acting that certain way around certain types of women. You know, you could be, honestly, you allowing that, you're allowing someone that's essentially dangerous to be around people that are coming in to pay for.
And also to do it to other employees. And, you know, I think people who behave in that type of way, it doesn't stop. It won't have stopped when she got fired. It will have continued, but it will have been targeted to someone else. And therefore the problem arises. So you think, oh, it's not in our interest to deal with this right now because we don't have the resource. Actually, no, it is in your interest, because then it stops it happening.
Well, actually, if an assault was to happen actually on their grounds, essentially in their hotel, then they'd have to, you know, close the hotel down, or there would be a police investigation.
Well, it would be an investigation into
an even bigger problem in the long run.
And also there would be an you would hope there'd be an investigation into how HR handled the situation.
Right.
And, you know, obviously there will have been so many things that went wrong, and the way they handled it was completely wrong. I feel so sad for her that she was the victim, and then she was made to feel as though she was the one that had done something wrong.
Awful.
It like happens all the time. Victim blaming is probably the most, you know, used tactic by crazy people to make the victim feel as though they've done something wrong, and that guy going in, you know, before her, obviously, to make himself look like, oh, he was the one that was really suffering, and all of this is just so wrong.
So if you were in that sort of situation and you felt like there was a potential threat, how would you go about it?
Okay, so there's a few different things that you can do. There's a lot of charities in the UK who are trying to tackle things like this. There's a charity called Victim Support where you can call in and you can have a conversation, and they can offer you support and guidance on how best to navigate that type of situation. You can also call the police. I know that this particular caller had a really negative experience, but that's not to say that everyone who calls the police has that type of experience. So you can call 999 or you can call 101 as well and file a report. And then I would always encourage, and I think something that people don't do enough or people don't talk about enough, is having a log. And like we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, you know, being able to have a log of things and write things down when they happen. Pictures, videos, recordings, anything you have can help in a case. And the more the better, because as we were saying, it's really hard to prosecute stalking cases. And
your word against theirs.
Yeah. Well, but there are, like, it's crazy. In this situation, there were witnesses.
Right.
There's like witnesses everywhere. And yet, like, no one, it's so shocking that those cases still don't even get prosecuted or don't get charged. Like, those people don't get charged, because it's like, there's literally evidence and witness statements and all of that sort of stuff potentially. So those are the things that you can do. And also, and I know it sounds silly, but like, share your experience with friends or family members or with someone whom you trust. Because I think, like, what we're doing with this podcast is sharing your experience can hopefully encourage more discourse around it and more conversation, and hopefully make you feel heard, because like this caller felt so dismissed in her feelings. And I think sometimes being validated in that can be really helpful as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's podcast. It was a very interesting episode. We feel very blessed and lucky that she decided to call us and feel comfortable enough to tell us her experience and her story. And tune in next week for the next episode.